Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to give just a minute or so to let others join, and then we will kick off. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you for attending the BusinessOptix Thought Leadership Series. This series is really focused on providing organizations access to thought leaders and methods to help you navigate the challenges and achieve success going forward. I'm very excited to introduce our speaker today, Clay Richardson from Digital Fast Forward. Clay was a former analyst with Forrester Research. He's an expert in design thinking, and he has over 20 years of technology leadership. And today he's going to discuss building operational resilience in the new normal. Before I turn over to Clay, just wanted to do a few housekeeping items. We will open it up for live questions at the end, but if you do have questions on the right-hand side of the panel, there is a question bar, and you're more than welcome to put your questions in there, and I will help facilitate asking Clay those. So Clay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Carrie, and welcome everyone to this session on how to apply design thinking to achieve operational resilience. And so I'm sure like a lot of you, you've seen, or a lot of us have gone through new experiences over the last 6 months. And so what this workshop is really about, or this session is really about, is how do you begin to build new muscle, new practices that help you drive innovation. One of the things that we've seen at Digital Fast Forward is just the level of innovation that companies are beginning to need to invest in has gone up. And so a lot of what we've been focused on around our ecosystem, working with partners like Pega, BusinessOptix, and Experience Point, is really starting to look beyond just simple, quick technology solutions, but starting to see what ideas and solutions are actually helping companies reinvent themselves, reboot, right, and reimagine a future based on some of the new reality that we have in front of us now. And so just to start, before we get going too far, I want to find out, just do a quick pulse of how much experience the audience has with design thinking. So that's the topic we're going to be talking about, how to use design thinking to drive operational resilience. And so if you go to menti.com and type in this code 2078781, it'll actually allow you to give your response. And I'll bring up, so just go to menti.com, all right, and type in this code 2078781. So go ahead, we'll give everybody a chance to bring up the browser, right? So we got one person saying they have extensive. Let's see, we'll give a few more minutes to give people a chance to hop in. And actually, we can also paste in the URL. Okay, some experience. Let's see, maybe we can get a few more responses. Some experience, let's see. Okay, we got 3 people responding. We'll give a few more and give a couple more minutes. Some experience. Let's see if we can get at least 10 of the 20. No experience. Okay, let's keep going. Let's see if we can get to 10 responses before we close it out. Close it off. Okay, 5. Okay, let's see, 3 more. Okay, we got the 8. Okay, and then 1 more. Let's see if we can get 1 more person at least to add in. Okay, so it sounds like, just looking at the audience, and some additional responses are coming in, sounds like the group here has some experience with design thinking, and that's really good. We see a lot of, when we're working with customers or teams that are getting started with design thinking, we're finding that there is some exposure to design thinking. But also what we're finding is teams are struggling to really shift from that design thinking mindset to more of design doing. And that's a big part of what we're going to be talking about, is in terms of building that operational resilience. It's really about not just design thinking, but also starting to implement, right? How do we do design doing? So balancing that. And so going back here, next question we're going to look at is just what area of your business has been impacted over the last 6 months. So if we look at everything that's happening with the economy, with businesses, and some of the challenges, just want to get a sense on or a pulse on what area of your business has been most impacted over the last 6 months. And so if we come here, you can see the different options. Customer service, supply chain, sales, team collaboration, service delivery, and just of those, which one of those has been most impacted for you, right? So maybe we go through here. Okay, service delivery, it's really good. Let's see if we can get maybe 5 or 6 more. Okay, sales, yeah, and we're seeing that a lot, like face-to-face sales has gone away, right? Or it's hard to do, and it's had to go digital. And so we know that's been a big piece. We're also seeing where teams or companies are struggling with supply chain. So it kind of depends on different industries, right? If we look at retail, supply chains has been a big, taken a hit. If we look at financial services, let's say, or insurance, it's been a lot on the sales side, on the customer service side. So it sounds like here a lot of service delivery and sales has been the impact. And so the key here is just we're seeing these impacts across the board, right? As a corporate innovation accelerator, that's our bread and butter, Digital Fast Forward. We help companies drive innovation around new ideas, new technology. But the biggest impact that we've seen is companies trying to reinvent themselves, right? And how do we rethink? Potentially we need to come up with new product, a new service. Potentially we need to rethink our processes. And so the question now is that we see, regardless of the industry, the question now we're seeing is companies asking, how are we going to pivot to engage our customers, right? Like that's been the big driver. So when you think about social distancing, when you think about customers not even being able to come out or shop in the same way, right? These are the questions we're seeing companies ask. And one of the things that we've been doing at Fast Forward is starting to collect and catalog examples of companies that have done a great job redesigning the customer experience, redesigning their products and services. And the key here is they're really listening to their customers, right? So listening to what is the customer saying and doing that's different than what they did before, and then how are they thinking and feeling about what's going on? And these are two key elements when it comes to design thinking. But the key here is when we see companies pivoting, I think this is critical. When we look at the companies that are doing a great job pivoting their services, they're designing new customer experiences and products, but they're also thinking about how does the employee experience need to change? How does the work itself even need to change? And so what we're seeing, some of the examples that we're seeing is really these leaders around resilience and reinventing. These leaders are reimagining both the customer experience and the employee experience together. So a good example of this, just to give you one of the companies we were looking at, I don't know how many of you run, marathons or 5Ks, 10Ks, but if you have, you've probably heard of Rock and Roll Marathon runs, right? And when coronavirus hit, Rock and Roll Marathon's business was really put in jeopardy, right? If you think about it, their business is based on events around running. People could not get out because of social distancing. There wasn't going to be any running in groups in the same way. And so they really were able to pivot their business around that customer experience. So really saying, okay, let's launch a new line or new product or service called VR Club. So they launched this VR Club, but they also redesigned the employee experience. And VR Club, actually, I joined it. I love it. Every week there's a new race. You're really running on your own or with your family, let's say, but then it's integrated with your running app. so that when you run, it's recording your run and then showing you how you ranked against everybody else. And it shows like, hey, you finished a 5K or a 10K, and here's what your ranking is. It's really, really cool. I definitely recommend checking it out, whether you're a runner or not. But what was amazing also is they also pivoted the employee experience from a customer service standpoint in terms of how customers could interact with employees when they were doing their race. So now, in the past, if I wanted to interact with Rock and Roll, I would call them up, or I would see somebody at a race. Well, now they've taken the employee experience, use Facebook as a way to connect employees with customers around the races that they have. So if an employee or a customer has a problem or a challenge around the race, they're able to connect via Facebook to the employee in a group and start interacting. And so this is just one example from one industry, right? So more of the health industry, but there are plenty of examples that we're seeing. So if I give you another example, a customer that we work with, bank, large regional bank, with coronavirus, one of the big challenges they had was paycheck protection program loans, right? They were getting all these applications, but they weren't able to actually submit the applications fast enough to the SBA to get them approved. And so what they started looking at is, okay, we have a customer experience that's really not working, right? And it's also impacting negatively the employee experience, because employees are getting all of these applications, but they're not able to process them. So guess what? People are calling in and saying, hey, I submitted this loan application and SBA says they have money, but you guys aren't processing my application. Why is it taking so long? And what we're able to do is start looking at redesigning both the customer experience. So how do we automate that or design this loan application process in a way to be able to quickly get approval from SBA, and thereby thinking about the employee experience without forcing employees to have to do a lot of rekeying and entering a lot of information just nonstop. And so what we're able to do, because they'd already defined their business processes pretty effectively, right? They documented their processes, had a good understanding of their lending processes. We were able to take those initial blueprints and start redesigning in a weekend to help them be in a position, basically using design thinking, help them be in a position to submit millions of dollars of loans up to the point where they were able to get approved get clients, their customers approved for $250 million in loans, right? And so you can see the impact. Like, it's not just about, hey, let's focus on redesign the customer experience. We have to also focus on reimagining that employee experience in the context of this new way of engaging with customers. And that's really where design thinking comes in, right? And throughout this may feel like a webinar, but I'm encouraging you to treat it as really a working session, right? So as we start going through and sharing the steps, walking through the steps, I want you to have in the back of your mind a challenge that your team or your organization is facing, that you need to think creatively and come up with some new ideas and new solutions as we go through this. So I'll plant that in the back of your mind, and we're going to come back to that. So just to introduce design thinking, so as Carrie mentioned, before launching Digital Fast Forward, the startup that I'm running now, I was a lead analyst at Forrester Research that focused on business process automation, innovation, digital transformation, and also this concept at the time when I was at Forrester was just starting to pick up some momentum called design thinking. And so when I was at Forrester, we came up with the definition of design thinking, or I was challenged to come up with the definition of design thinking. And this is the definition we put out, right? Design thinking is a collection of practices that helps teams better identify with customer experiences, right? And shift from logical problem solving to creative experimentation, right? Little did I know when we came up with this definition that it would really be such a needed discipline today, right? if you look at this, if we dig into it, it helps teams identify what the customer experience is, which is so critical. But most importantly, in the world we're in right now, we have to shift from logical problem solving to creative experimentation, because we're not going to be able to use just logic to say, here's what's going to happen tomorrow. Most of us don't know like what's really going to happen tomorrow or next week or the week after, but we can begin to experiment, make some assumptions, and actually start trying different things. And that's what design thinking gives you, that superpower. And so design thinking can be contrasted against kind of traditional thinking or traditional approaches. We can think of it as traditional systems thinking, right? So if we look at, traditional practices or traditional systems thinking practices, it's usually when we approach a problem, we look at it holistically, right? We're looking at, let's look at this end to end. Let's try to figure out where the challenges are, right? In design thinking, we're trying to zero in on a specific problem or challenge. That's why design thinking is great for customer experience, because we can look at the customer journey. What are the steps that a customer is going through? And then we can zero in on just one specific touch point, right? Or even in the employee experience, employee journey, we can zero in. That's why design thinking is very helpful today. We don't need to take 5 months, 8 months, 9 months, or a year to figure out or solve a particular problem. We can zero in on one specific point, and in some cases take a half day and just iterate on it to come up with some solutions, right? Systems thinking practices focus on linkages. So if you think about just systems, traditional systems thinking, we're looking at how does all this stuff tie together? What are the relationships to all this stuff? In design thinking, we're looking at context. We want to understand what is important to this situation right now, right? So if we look at systems thinking, it's about logic. So let's use logic to come to a natural conclusion. This happened yesterday. This happened today. So more than likely, this is what's going to happen tomorrow. That's really the logic side of systems thinking. In design thinking, it's really about empathy, right? That's a very different, that's a shift, right? If you think about it, we go from logic, just looking at the numbers, doing the analysis, to empathy, right? How many of you are familiar with what empathy is, right? That's just become a big word over the last 2-3 years, but it's really about being able to put ourselves in other shoes. And that's so important now. It's more than a buzzword now. It's really a way of operating, right? We have to be able to put ourselves in our customer shoes, employee shoes, and in our family shoes, right? And it's interesting, I had a conversation with someone recently about empathy where we started talking about, or they were sharing with me that the first step to empathy is really curiosity, right? And so empathy, when we start looking at this, we want to kind of start to develop some curiosity. That's a big part of design thinking. And then in systems thinking, it's about deductive reasoning, right? So again, we can look at all of the data and we can deduce what we think the outcome should be. With design thinking, it's about abductive reasoning, right? Which is a very fancy way of saying creative brainstorming, right? So trying to look at things, look at a situation and start brainstorming around what possible scenarios might unfold that may not be obvious, right? So that abductive logic. And we'll go through this and I'll give some examples, but I just wanted to lay the foundation for you on why is design thinking? What are the characteristics of design thinking that make it very unique in terms of being a tool that can drive innovation today? And so the other part of design thinking that's very helpful, and particularly from a building resilience and operational resilience standpoint, is it lays out specific steps you can follow to get to a set of new ideas and solutions, right? If any of you have ever, I guess I'll ask the question, maybe just raise your hand. I probably won't be able to see you, but how many of you have had a really great idea and you thought, whether it's for your company or just for yourself personally, like had $1 billion or $1 million idea, and you were like, okay, I'm gonna go tackle this and implement it. And then I know I have, right? I've had a lot of these ideas like, oh, this is a good idea. But I never had a process of what are the steps I take to turn that idea into an actual result or a product or service, right? And not product management, like I don't want to go become a product manager, but I just want, when I have an idea, I can follow specific steps and get to the outcome that I'm looking for, at least validate whether something is a good idea or not. And so design thinking gives you those steps. So we can define the challenge. That's the first step, framing a challenge. Then observing people. So really being able to, this is part of building that empathy, observe, see, I can go out on the street. If I have an idea, I can go out on the street, observe how are people interacting with this idea, right? How are they, I can even talk to them, right? But it's observing people, then forming insights. So based on what I observe, what sort of insights are important, right? What were the key light bulb moments in some of my conversations or some of my observations? Then we can frame the opportunities and then begin to brainstorm ideas, which is really the critical, this is really the meat of design thinking, is that brainstorming, coming up with hundreds of ideas that we can begin to experiment with, right? And then try experiments as that last piece. So we go through, we're able to create very low cost, low time investment experiments so we can move quickly. And again, you can see why this is critical for the time that we're in. Companies are not looking to invest large amounts of dollars or just sums of money in new things without having an indicator that those things are going to work. In the past, yep, we could probably invest and say, okay, we're going to put $10 million into this new initiative, and then 2 years later, we'll see where it is. Well, now companies are saying, okay, well, maybe we put in $10,000, kind of jumpstart a few ideas, kind of capture and document what is working, right? And then we move forward with a further investment. And so what design thinking gives you is this ability to focus on the desirability bubble. So instead of starting out looking at, is something feasible? That's the world a lot of us come from, right? Is I'm going to do an ROI report and hopefully the ROI report will show that we're going to get some sort of return on our investment around an initiative, right? Design thinking says, forget the ROI report. Let's first see if this is something people will even use. Does it solve a problem, right? And so if you think about it, right, I think a lot of us on the call, we can all think of ideas or products that were developed that were not ever really used or gained an adoption. So maybe, I don't know if you can type in the chat, like what's a product that you can think of that that never achieved mainstream adoption, right? No, it didn't really solve a problem, or people just really were like, I'm not really going to use that. Can anybody type in the chat?
Not yet.
Okay, so don't type in the chat. So, but I can hear people. I can hear somebody say, Clay, the Zune, which was the Microsoft MP3 player that Microsoft put out. It never really caught on 100%. Obviously, some of that might have been because of the iPhone, but also if you think about Google Glass, right? How many of you own Google Glass? Google probably spent billions of dollars to create Google Glass, put it out into the market. It never caught on. Doesn't mean that it wasn't a good idea. It just means they probably started with, hey, wouldn't it be cool to build some glasses that, people could see, have video cam, that sort of thing, without really looking at, is this desirable? Is it actually solving a real problem, right? And so that's what design thinking gives us. And you'll see design thinking across multiple industries, across all industries. Actually, Ford's CEO, he came from Steelcase, or the current CEO. I know they have another new CEO coming in, but he used design thinking at Ford to really think through, how do they keep their workers safe during coronavirus. So at the very beginning, they brought all of their safety teams together, used design thinking to create a 70-page manual on how to keep our workers safe during this time, particularly the workers in the manufacturing plants. And so you'll see so many examples of design thinking across different industries in terms of being able to drive innovation. But the characteristic that you're going to see most consistently is drive innovation in a very short time frame. That's usually where design thinking you'll see the impact. So to start, so like I mentioned before, we're going to use this as a working session. So again, I'm going to give you a minute, right? I'm going to set a little timer, give you a minute to write down a major challenge that your organization is facing, that your team or organization are facing. Okay, so write down a major challenge that your team or your organization are facing. And so, that can be, we've had some challenges around how can we improve engagement and self-service for customers, right? So one of the insurance companies we work with, that's one of the challenges they're facing is, the customer service lines, they're getting more calls, right? So calls are going up, the volume is going up, and what they're trying to figure out, the challenge that they're having is, how can we get more customers to use self-service, right? Is that even feasible? Like we need to get self-service to be better. Just as an example, that's in insurance. Obviously in healthcare, there's a lot of different challenges. In banking, there's challenges. So go ahead, I'm going to shut up for 1 minute and let you write out what is a major challenge your team or your organization is facing. Set a little timer. Okay, so maybe another 30 seconds here. And time. Okay. All right, so to start, the first step in using design thinking to build operational resilience is really to make sure you're framing your question in a way that's going to foster collaboration and ideation, right? And so I love this quote from Eero Saarinen. This is a famous Finnish architect. This quote, always design a thing by considering it in its next larger context, a chair in a room in a house in an environment in a city plan, right? And so really, how many of you are familiar with Eero Saarinen? Maybe just, I can virtually see your hands go up. So, okay. So Eero Saarinen, as I mentioned, famous Finnish architect, but he designed the St. Louis Arch, right? And so when you think about what he's saying here in the context of what he designed for the St. Louis Arch, in the St. Louis Arch is the St. Louis Arch represented the gateway to the West. So he was really designing the St. Louis Arch to represent a part of America. So he was looking at America in a broader context instead of just looking at this one location. And that's a tool that designers use, right? Is to zoom out and think of problems in the next broader context, right? And so he's saying this, it's not just about a chair and designing a chair, it's about designing a chair that's going to sit in the room. What is it going to do in the room, right? What's the purpose of the chair in the room? So thinking through it in its next broader context. And that's a really good habit or a really good step to follow when you're starting to look at redesigning employee experiences or rethinking a customer experience. And really, when you're defining the challenge, you want to make sure you're zooming out to think, what is the context from the customer's point of view, right? Because a lot of times we'll see organizations when they start with design thinking or just start focusing on a problem, they'll just look at it from their point of view, right? So if I look at one of the customers we worked with, was AARP, right? And so ARP, they were looking at launching a new holiday, really, or a new day. I think it was like come back to work day to commemorate you going, going away from the company you're with. Maybe you've been gone for 10 years and you want to now, come back to remember. So they were trying to have this new movement, if you will. And one of the things we realized was when they framed the challenge, they framed it more from their point of view as opposed to the customer's point of view. And so the first step is to make sure you're framing your challenge or whatever the problem is from the customer's perspective, right? Or from the user, really, it's the user, that can be the customer, the employee's perspective, and make sure it's broad enough that it's going to allow you to discover new areas. So you want to make sure it's broad enough that you can uncover some new ideas, but narrow enough that you haven't already baked in the solution, right? Which is really critical. And so this is just a little bit of a tip, but just to give you an example here, right? So this is, I mentioned an insurance company we work with. One of the challenges they were having was around how might we minimize the number of customers who call into the contact center when signing up for new insurance products and services, right? So they wanted to get more of the customers using self-service. And so when we look at this, one, does that have, and let me go back, does that have the customer or the user at the center, right? Potentially, but the challenge is it's more about them, right? It's like, well, we don't want people calling because it's clogging up the lines. It's really more focused on internal, inside out, as opposed to outside in. And so here we started working to say, okay, let's put the customer in it, right? So this one was a little bit too narrow. So how might we use robotic automation to answer most common customer questions, right? That's definitely too narrow because it has the solution baked in. Then there was another one that was too broad, and we used the term how might we, when in design thinking, we're framing challenges, just as a little pointer there. But the too broad was how might we reduce the hold time for customers who call in with issues, right? That might be like from a customer standpoint, customers care about that, but it may be a little bit too broad to actually come up with some tangible ideas. And so just right, how might we empower customers to save time and reduce frustration through convenient self-service options? And so we're really trying to look at it from the standpoint of what's the benefit to the customer or the employee, and then highlighting how are we reducing frustration or improving convenience, right? And so when we frame challenges, we want to make sure we put the customer in or user in, and we're highlighting the benefit, right? And so now what I want you to do, we'll take a minute. I want you to go ahead and write out, look at the problem that you wrote down initially, and I want you to now rewrite that problem, putting the customer or employee at the center, right? So if you think about it, if you wrote out maybe at the beginning, you wrote out a challenge, how might we increase our revenues? Or actually, this is a good one, we've seen this a lot. How might we increase our cash flows during COVID? Or a lot of people had sales. Me and my team actually did this recently, is how might we increase sales over the next 6 months, right? That sounds great, but at the end of the day, customers don't care about whether we increase sales or not. That's not really solving a problem. It's not really focused on their challenge. And so we needed to pivot that, right? We needed to say, how might we empower customers to take the next leap with design thinking or something like that, right? But the idea is we shifted from, just looking at what's in it for us to, okay, what is it in it? What's in it for the customer? What problem is important for them? So go ahead and take a minute and just rewrite your how might we in that way. Okay, so we'll give another minute here. I would play some nice music. Let's see if we can get some Jeopardy music on for you. We'll give it a minute. Here we go. So go ahead and rewrite that. Another 30 seconds or so. Rewrite. Just think about, is the customer in this statement, right? Okay. So give that a few minutes. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. All right. Okay, so the next step is we need to observe customers, right? So this is a famous quote from Steve Jobs. A lot of times people don't know what they want until you show it to them. And so what Steve Jobs was saying here is really, in order for us to create something new or drive innovation, we're first going to have to observe what are people doing, right? Not just go and ask them, hey, is this a good idea or is this not a good idea? Because a lot of times people aren't going to actually be able to tell you, yeah, this is a great idea. Like with the iPhone or even with the iPod, just going and asking people wasn't going to be enough, right? And so when we start to look at this and observe people, what we want to look for are extreme users, right? So we want to find those people that are outliers, right? Why do we want to find people that are outliers? Well, those are the best sources of inspiration. So when we look at different scenarios, right, we want to say, okay, if we're trying to create something new or we're trying to come up with some new ideas, if we just look at the usual suspects, people in the middle, a lot of times we're going to get the same ideas, right? Doesn't mean we don't interview them. We basically want to make sure we're using tools that allow us to get insights from everyone, right? So in terms of modeling tools, in terms of process management, you want to make sure you're using tools that allow everyone to give input. That's critical. But you also want to start looking at those outliers because it's usually that person that has an extreme view that gives you the spark that's needed to go and drive innovation, right? And just to give you an example, so the example that I gave earlier of the insurance company that we worked with, with the challenge they were having of how do we increase the amount of self-service. And so we started looking at different users and we found that there was one user profile or persona that was the insurance buyer who rely heavily on their insurance agent to actually buy their insurance products, right? So they go to their independent agent, say, hey, what products do you think I need to get? And then the agent would actually give them guidance and they could go forward. And so the funny part about this story was also in one scenario, the insurance buyer and the insurance agent actually played a lot of golf together. And that's where the agent was able to give the advice. And so we started looking at this, like how would we guide this persona, right? This insurance buyer persona to now use self-service, right? And it became a challenge, but it also sparked a lot of really good ideas, right? In terms of, actually potentially having the agent introduce the insurance buyer to self-service, and then the agent may get a benefit from it, right? And so there were a lot of creative ideas that came out of that extreme persona that we focus on. And so that's what you want to do, is start looking for those extreme personas, identifying them, and start to observe them. And particularly if you look at now redesigning experiences, right? There's extreme personas from one side, people that really stay in the house completely, don't go outside at all, wear masks in the house, to people who no matter what, they're not going to wear a mask, right? So those are examples of extreme personas. But even in your business, you want to start looking at what are those extreme personas when it comes to this new environment, and start cataloging them and understanding how they're behaving when it comes to your product, service, and processes. And so the thing you want to look for when you're observing people, especially now, look for workarounds and adaptations. Like, what are they doing differently, right? There's a lot of things. Like, if you think about, if you looked at me right now, as me and my family, you know, we're starting to do a lot of things differently, right? We're starting to buy from Blue Apron, you know, starting these new services. And so when you do an observation, especially now is the time to try to find what are people doing differently? What are some workarounds that they have? What are things that people care about? So putting ourselves in other people's shoes. So this graphic is from an example case study around a toy furniture manufacturer, child furniture manufacturer, where the designers started getting under the table to look at what is it like for a child that's looking up at underneath the table, and how do we design that better? And then we also want to look for surprises, things that might surprise us when it comes to the idea or challenge that we're focused on. What you also want to do is capture that in a empathy map, right? So when you're doing observation, you want to be able to take a look at and document what is the customer seeing, what are they saying, what are they hearing, thinking, and feeling, right? And then the last step, so again, going back to your idea or the challenge you're focused on, now that you have it framed well, you understand who is the customer the persona that you're going to draw ideas and inspiration from. Now we want to get into generating ideas. This is one of the last steps of design thinking, one of the last stages. So in terms of generating ideas, this great quote from Linus Pauling: the best way to have a good idea is to have lots of ideas, right? That sounds very corny or very cliche, but what he's effectively saying here is a lot of times people, when they have an idea, they stop at that one idea, right? Like, oh, this is a great idea. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to go figure out if this is going to work. But what he's saying is we need to have lots of ideas that maybe that one idea is a starting point, but we want to get hundreds, if not thousands, if we can go that far, but we want to get a lot of ideas, right? And so we'll go back to Menti here, and I just want to get a sense from the group, how has remote work impacted the level of collaboration in your company, right? So if you go to menti.com, use this code 5139040. Let's just see, because that's one of the things that we've seen is just the level of collaboration has been impacted. In some cases, it's increased. In some cases, it's been reduced. And I'm just curious to see what other people are seeing in their companies. So reduced, wow. So we have a couple reduced, one is increased, so reduced. Yeah, and that's been the general trend that we've seen is the amount of collaboration that teams are having has just been reduced because of remote work, right? Even with Zoom, with other tools, it's still kind of teams are trying to work through how do we drive collaboration, and particularly if you're trying to drive innovation, collaboration is really essential. And so this next piece on brainstorming is really designed to help you increase the amount of collaboration that you're having. We're seeing teams, and we do this ourselves, is once a week we have a team brainstorm session. And it's really been great in terms of just practicing creativity, but even more importantly, really starting to brainstorm solutions around real problems and challenges we're having. And we facilitated a few of these with other companies, just routine weekly brainstorm sessions that spark creativity. And so the key with brainstorming is you really want to create a safe space for brainstorming. The one thing that kills brainstorming is really that people don't feel safe enough to put their ideas out. And that, again, that sounds a little cliche, but we've just found that. I've done brainstorming with different universities, with different across different industries. But it's interesting, in university environments, that's where I've seen the most fear of putting ideas out. When we've done brainstorming sessions for different universities, people, for whatever reason, and these are, accomplished people, if you will, that you'd say, well, why are you afraid to put your idea out? But part of it is creating that safe space, creating those guardrails so people feel comfortable putting their ideas on the table. And so there's some rules to apply when it comes to brainstorming that help create that safe space, like deferring judgment, right? So when you're brainstorming, make sure you're actually saying, we're not going to judge the ideas during this time. We're just going to come up with a bunch of crazy ideas, and we're going to put them up on the wall using sticky, or we're going to post them digitally. But you want to make sure you defer judgment. No bad ideas at this point. Encourage wild ideas. So this is really critical in terms of just getting people to get comfortable and to loosen up. So encouraging wild ideas. And it's really those wild ideas that drive innovation. It's interesting. We did a workshop, a brainstorming workshop with a business incubator recently, where one of the businesses had a new idea, and we helped facilitate this. And what was interesting was what we did is a little bit different. We actually started the brainstorm session saying, let's come up with ideas that could cause the company to fail, right? That sounds really weird, right? I know you're looking at me like, what the, right? But we wanted to start with, let's identify all the bad ideas to get people comfortable. Like if somebody tells you, give me a bad idea, right? You're going to come up with a bad idea because there's a little disclaimer, like, this is a bad idea, right? But what was amazing in doing that activity is some of the bad ideas that people came up with, or they felt were bad ideas, were actually the best ideas. And so when we say encourage wild ideas, some of that is about just letting people think very differently, not worrying about, is the idea going to work or not, right? And so we want to encourage these wild ideas. Build on the ideas of others. So this is also a big design thinking concept. It's so important that when you're brainstorming, to let people know it's okay to actually build on somebody else's idea. Traditionally, we don't want to build on somebody's idea because it may be looked at as we're trying to take their idea. In design thinking, it's the exact opposite. We're actually building on ideas because building on ideas makes ideas stronger and able to move forward. So it's important to build on ideas. One conversation at a time. This is really critical. Definitely if you're doing face-to-face brainstorming, just make sure you set this guardrail of one conversation at a time. So that way people feel like they're going to be heard. And so some of the tips that we have for remote brainstorming, make sure you're leveraging tools such as Mural, which is an online tool for ideation. You can do like electronic post-it. It's really good. So if you go to, I think it's mural.ai, or if you do a Google search, just Mural. What we've also found to be very helpful for collecting the ideas, brainstorm ideas, is Google Sheets. And one of the things that's nice about Google Sheets is that it's a shared spreadsheet or shared document, so people can put in their ideas and the rest of the team can see it. So we've worked with teams to use Google Sheets as a way for remote teams, virtual teams, to really collaborate during a brainstorm session. Also, make sure you frame the challenge before the brainstorm session, right? So sometimes we'll see teams, they'll say, okay, well, let's do our framing during the brainstorm session, or they don't come with any framing at all, right? Or only one person did the framing, right? What we recommend is try to break apart the framing, coming up with the challenge, the how might we work together with the team on that. That's one session, and then do another session that's just focused on the brainstorming. Even in a virtual world or remote world, we still use stickies, right? So stickies are still really helpful just for ideation, physical stickies. and then sticking it up. And then when you go over your ideas, you're just sharing the sticky with the team, right? It's just, there's something, and there's documents or white papers on this. Just Post-its plus a pen or marker actually helps with creativity, right? People don't feel as beholden to this and this as they do to if I'm standing over my computer and I need to type something in. And there's a higher level of commitment when you're standing over your computer typing in an idea, as opposed to this. I can write it out. If I don't like the idea, I can throw it in the trash, right? It's a little bit easier. And then you want to make sure you're using a timer, whether it's on the phone or there's like Google has a really cool egg timer, but you want to set that timer for 5 to 10 minutes for the ideation or for the brainstorming. You definitely want to have a time block in the virtual world. If you just have it going on, people, one, kind of lose their minds because there's so much silence for a period of time. But two, you want to force that time, use that time to force the ideation and get people just thinking and moving forward. And then set a target for a minimum number of ideas. So you might say in the next 10 minutes, let's see if we each can come up with 30, 40 ideas, right? And so setting that target gives people something to aim at and stretch for. And then at the end, have the team identify their own top 5, 3 to 5 ideas, and then have them read that out, right? Do the final readout, share ideas. And then what we've also seen teams do is post the ideas. So like I mentioned with Google Sheets, post your ideas in Google Sheets, and then you're able to have the team members vote on which idea they want to move forward with, or which ideas they want to move forward with. And so the last piece that we're going to wrap up on is make ideas tangible, right? So the key here is how can we take our ideas and start turning them into experiments so that we can learn, right? And so I love this quote from Tim Brown, the CEO of IDEO: rather than thinking to build, build to think, right? It's a great quote. What does it mean? Well, what he's saying here is a lot of times when we have an idea, we actually go and try to figure it all out before we start building, right? And what he's saying here is actually sometimes building helps you think through the idea as opposed to the reverse, right? And so just to give you an example, this is a team that they basically were trying to test out an idea around reducing the amount of paper cups that are thrown away in their office, right? So from coffee or water or whatever, right? And so they did this little experiment, just very cheap, inexpensive, experiment where they got ceramic mugs, got rid of the paper cups for one day, put the ceramic mugs out, and just put up a little sign, right? Took what, maybe $10 for the mugs, and then maybe 30 minutes to set all of this up, right? And they just wanted to test this idea out before they tried to take it to the next level. They came back the next day, all the mugs were put away, the paper cups were back out, and this little sign was crumpled up and thrown into the trash can. What do you think happened? Why do you think the sign was thrown into? They could see the little sign in the trash can, mugs were put away, right? They ran this experiment and they realized that an assumption that they had was not true. They had an assumption that everybody was going to be happy about recycling and using the mugs. The person they didn't take into account was the cleaning team, the cleaning crew, right? They came, looked at this and was like, what the, like, we're not going to clean all these mugs, right? And they basically put the paper cups back out, threw this sign in the trash can. And so when we run experiments, it's really about learning. When we're building a prototype or trying out an idea, it's really about learning, not about, is this the right idea? It's really about, okay, let's try this, see what we can learn from it, right? And so what we're seeing online now, or in the kind of virtual world, is more teams are running these virtual experiments, whether that's through Zoom, whether that's through just standing up a questionnaire or a page. But we're seeing these low fidelity prototypes, even just simple storyboards teams are building out just to show how an idea would work before they try to fully build it out, right? And so very low fidelity, low cost, okay? And so what you want to think about with your ideas that you, once you have a chance to brainstorm, figure out which idea you think would be good to prototype, do a low fidelity prototype, but also think about what are the hidden assumptions around the idea that you want to test or uncover, right, with the prototype. And then create a low fidelity prototype. Like I said, you do a little storyboard. That's a prototype. You can do a 4-point, we call it 4-frame storyboard that just says, okay, here's how someone will work with this idea, what steps they would take. So it's pretty simple. And so that's really your crash course in design thinking for digital resilience or operational resilience. And one of the things that we're doing with BusinessOptix is really teaming up to offer a follow-on one-on-one strategy session, 1-hour strategy session at no cost, complimentary, really to help teams that are starting to look at design thinking or really struggling around a specific challenge, really to help you begin to map out how you would use design thinking to begin tackling that challenge, right? And so at Digital Fast Forward, a lot of what we focused on, like I mentioned before, is kind of going from design thinking to design doing. So the boot camps, innovation sprints, coaching on the think side, and then on the do side, we do what we call innovation strikes, which are very fast moving innovation projects. We do code delivery, and then we have an innovation subscription program just to access innovation and design sprints on an ongoing basis. And so I'll stop there. I can't believe I went to 11:57 Eastern time, but Carrie, I can open it up to questions if we have time.
We do. So we're going to unmute everybody, but you also have to unmute yourself if you have a question. So while we're waiting for one, your innovation strikes, I think one of the great things that we've seen when jointly we go to customers is how quickly you can impact change. Yes. Versus those long cycles. And so my question to you quickly is, how do you get your executive team bought into sessions like this? What is the way to approach them?
Yeah, it's really what we found is what's really helpful is to use the language of challenges and problems, right? Like what are our top 5 challenges that we're going to have to tackle over the next 6 months or next quarter? We've just found when you start talking, that's at a level executives feel like, okay, let's see, right, how we can do this. And I think particularly now, what we're seeing from executives that are buying in or really gravitating towards design thinking is just being able to do things in shorter time frames and being able to say, okay, we can run a 3-day, virtual workshop where the executive may be there for the first hour, but then the team can really just use that time to focus on what does the future need to look like around this problem. We're seeing that be a very effective way to communicate to executives, like we can have a short period of time, but we're going to have to begin to think through what's next. And even just this concept of executives are starting to see the need to just take a pause, right, and have these periods of time, whether it's a quarter or every 6 months, to really pause and think on innovation as a group. And so I think those two pieces of, being able to step back, but also being able to start cataloging the challenges and using a tool like design thinking to begin to think outside of the box. So, yeah, it's a good question.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Okay, well, we are coming up upon the hour. If you do have questions as you start to kind of consume the information you've learned today, we will be sending out the recording. You can certainly reach out to Digital Fast Forward via LinkedIn as well as BusinessOptix, and we'll connect you into Clay. But Clay, thank you so much. Appreciate the time and information. and we'll be in touch with all the attendees soon.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for attending.